Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Reference Point. I'm your host, Dave Cokerhook. This evening, we're going to have a conversation with Dr. Paris Kidd. Dr. Kidd is a nutritional scientist. He's been studying how the body reacts and responds to vitamins and foods and things like that at a cellular level for some over 20 years, I believe, is it. So we're going to talk to Dr. Kidd about some very, very interesting things that address health and wellness. So, Dr. Kidd, thank you so much for being here on Reference Point.
It's really my pleasure, Dave. Really good to be here.
Well, I appreciate that you came all the way to, and I guess you drove down from Grass Valley to be here on the show tonight. So thank you for that.
I'm a country gentleman these days.
Oh, very cool.
Far cry from being a Berkeley radical.
A Berkeley radical. You're going to have to tell us a little bit about that. You were telling me before the show how you got your PhD at Berkeley. I think you said you had gotten your undergraduate degrees in zoology and
Marine biology at the University of the West Indies in Kingston, Jamaica.
Right, and then you came to Berkeley and you started studying cellular biology?
Yes, I started doing cell-level biology. I'd always been fascinated by cells, and I was able to work with living cells. I studied fertilization, the process of fertilization, and it's really fun to watch fertilization occur under the microscope. And then I did electron microscopy. I did quite a lot of study of these.
You're going to have to tell me what that means, because that electron microscopy is a word that I'm not familiar with, and possibly some of the viewing audience might not be familiar with too. So what exactly is that?
Well, let's just say that I used very, very high magnification microscopy, and I studied just about everything about the organization of the cell, its anatomy, its structure, and how that matched up with function.
Okay.
And then as I finished my PhD, I went into teaching and research in the University of California system. I got further training at the San Francisco Medical School. I was in the Cardiovascular Research Institute there. I studied beating hearts.
Oh, wow.
I cultured heart cells. Did quite a bit of real, live, hands-on work in the laboratory.
Okay, but this is all at the research level. It wasn't like as a practicing physician or anything like that.
I had earned my PhD, and I worked with physicians. I still work with physicians to this time.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a kind of understanding that the MDs handle the humans and the PhDs handle the rest of the stuff.
There you go. There you go. So let's talk a little bit about some of the work that you have done. Now, as you began your research, I guess you started to understand and appreciate some things about how, at a cellular level, the body actually works, and then how that impacts wellness and disease and medication and all sorts of things like that. Is that a fair statement?
That's very fair, Dave. And the area that I'm most passionate about is orthomolecules. That is, according to the definition from Professor Linus Pauling, the two-time Nobel Prize winner, who actually won his first Nobel Prize for the structure of proteins, and then his second Nobel Prize for peace, he realized that substances that occur naturally in the body as part of the body's biochemistry, intrinsic to our biochemistry and our metabolism and to our most basic life processes,
mm-hmm.
those substances should be most valuable for human health. And he called them orthomolecules, molecules orthodox to the body.
Oh, okay.
So for example, the vitamins are orthomolecules. Vitamin C is an orthomolecule. And as I studied orthomolecules, I began to realize that there was something very deep here. I began to realize that Pauling was right, and that orthomolecules could be used at different levels of intake, usually by mouth, and that by varying the levels of intake, we could get varying degrees of benefit that went far beyond what drugs or even herbals could do.
So let me see if I understand that correctly. What I'm understanding you to say, Dr. Kidd, is that there are substances that are intrinsically part of our bodies, okay, and that I'm gathering from what you're talking about in terms of ingesting certain whatever you want to supplements, that we either don't produce enough of it, or we could use more of it, or there's something about them that we need to take them in, and by doing so, then we enhance the body's ability to fight disease and things like that?
That's right, Dave. We enhance the body's efficiency overall in every way you could think of. These are really the molecules of life. You know, we have somewhere around 30,000 genes, and I think altogether they make 5 to 10,000 different proteins, and all of those proteins are molecules of life. There are other substances that are made in the body that altogether make our cells, and then our cells generate the life energy, and the life energy is used to carry out all the processes that keep us alive.
Sure.
And the bases for these processes are bringing in substances from the outside, usually in the form of food, and those substances are then used to renew the molecules of life.
Okay.
Now, we have a complication here. The complication is that we don't live in a clean world. We don't live in a world where everything can go smoothly. It's not like in Silicon Valley where everything is in a sterile, totally protected environment. We have stresses on the body, and those stresses can be chemical, they can be physical, such as heat and cold, they can be emotional, such as emotional stress, the stress that people go through from living their daily lives.
Sure.
And all of those stresses tend to burn away these molecules of life.
Okay.
Many of these molecules of life are called antioxidants.
I've heard that term, yes.
So in 1983, I had a chance to work on a book on antioxidants, and that's what really got me out of the strictly academic pursuits and more into the practical aspects of how these orthomolecules, how these molecules of life can be used to improve human health. And for me as a Berkeley radical, that was a very enviable opportunity, because I had felt that in academics, I would be working my whole life, and then if I was lucky, maybe 50 years after I would pass away, then I might get some big prize or something. But during the course of my life, I wanted to have a more direct impact on people for the better. So as I got into this book on antioxidants, I realized that this was a really, really deep concept, and that's when I met Dr. Robert Cathcart.
I want to go into that a little more deeply, Dr. Kidd, but first I'd like you to help us understand what antioxidants really are. I mean, this term is used all the time. I mean, you read it in the papers. I've heard about a study that's happening at Stanford these days into antioxidants. You look on supplements, everybody's talking about antioxidants, blueberries have good. What exactly does that mean? What is it that people need to understand about this term that can actually help them in the decisions they make?
Well, you will run into the term misdefined in many, many, many areas, poorly defined. But an antioxidant is a substance that donates electrons. Now, any chemical reaction involves exchange of electrons.
Okay.
That's what drives nature, that's what drives life.
It's that basic chemistry from high school, that much I remember.
That's the basic chemistry. Now, as we use oxygen, we create reactive derivatives of oxygen that take away electrons from the molecules of life. So we can get protein damage, we can get DNA damage, we can get damage to other sophisticated molecules. And to protect us from that, there arose this very sophisticated interlocking system, a network called the antioxidant system. And this consists of a number of nutrients such as vitamin C, vitamin E, and also enzymes, very efficient enzymes that mobilize the electrons to quench those oxygen-free radicals.
Okay.
Now, eventually, it's the oxygen-free radicals that put an end to our life.
Okay.
If we live long enough, we're continually generating oxygen-free radicals from the first time that we breathe.
Right.
We bring oxygen in, and 3 to 5% of all the oxygen that we breathe goes into making free radicals. And we can't totally quench them. So our antioxidant system is there, and if we're lucky, we have a very efficient antioxidant system, and we can get to be as good-looking and vibrant as you are.
Well,
I know you're 90 years old. I know you're much, much older than you look. So you're one of the lucky ones. Now, again, coming back to the not-so-perfect world, in this modern world in which we live, there are some 70,000 chemicals in use, and the vast majority of those chemicals will take away electrons from us.
Sure.
And that's why we need not just the antioxidants that we usually get, that we can usually make, or that we used to make back when we were cave guys.
That the body would
but now we need
typically
supplements.
produce. So because of the nature of the environment, we need more than we might normally have needed, several thousand years ago.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. As I was preparing to speak with you, I ran into one of my illustrations that showed the levels of petroleum derivatives in the circulating blood of children. And kids have tremendous amounts of circulating toxins, and adults have even more. I think the latest studies indicated more than 100 detectable petroleum byproducts and other toxic benzene ring type compounds, other synthetic compounds that permeate our environment. So we have this beautiful intrinsic antioxidant protective system that donates electrons to all these threatening substances that should not be in our bodies in this ideal world, but we need even more. And that's how these supplements come in, and that's how this really good research on fruits and vegetables and other types of foods can come around to finding that some foods are so protective because they have high antioxidant power. So this is a very important part of living. And way back in 1985, I wrote the first definitive text on antioxidants for human health.
Wonderful.
And I was fascinated by it. And towards the end of that process, I was introduced to Bob Cathcart.
Right.
And I found that he understood antioxidants better than I did. And that really impressed me. And he was already who we called Dr. C, because he was the vitamin C expert worldwide.
Right.
And I learned more from him about vitamin C. He wrote a preface for my book that was very nice. And I realized that here was a brilliant person who really understood antioxidants and really understood how vitamin C worked as an antioxidant. So, and the interesting thing about C is that it's the most cost-effective of all these supplements that we can take. It's very, very inexpensive, and the more we take, the better we do.
The better we do. Now, there's a lot of information up on your website about this type of thing. Is there not, Dr. Kidd?
Yes, there is. I've put two types of informational databases on my site. One is the professional stuff, the heavy-duty scientific stuff.
Right.
But also there's a series of columns that I wrote for a magazine called Total Health. My columns are up there, and they're in very plain language, and they very understandable stuff. And they talk about these phenomena, these real-life phenomena, and they talk about antioxidants, they talk about orthomolecules, and they talk about a lot of, like, for example, one of my columns was, why should you take vitamins? The very conservative parties in nutrition say you don't need vitamins, you only need foods. Unfortunately, the volume of toxic attack on the body, the degree of toxic attack on the body is so great now that you could eat the best foods and still not get enough protection. So for example, vitamin E, the amount of vitamin E we get from foods, if we were eating salads all day, we still would not get enough E to protect us from a typical lifestyle.
Well, this takes us into an area of looking at these recommended daily allowance type pieces of information that come from the Food and Drug Administration, et cetera, and how that relates to some of Dr. Cathcart's work. I've had the privilege of knowing Dr. Cathcart personally. My wife had worked with him, actually. And and he was doing some fascinating things, and it sounds like it ties right into your arena. But I'm very interested in hearing a little more about this dosage, recommended dosage, how the typical mainstream medical profession relates to this type of thing, and where Dr. Cathcart's information, the things that he developed, how that ties into this whole area that you're talking about.
Well, the RDAs, or daily values, however you want to put it, there's like 2 or 3 different ways to put it now, have not been revised since the 80s. The reason being that the experts cannot come to a consensus on what they should be. So the existing ones have stayed, and how they were worked out was in the very early vitamin days. In some cases, before this mass of chemicals entered the human environment, they would get some subjects, put them away somewhere, feed them a very minimal diet, and sometimes, usually a diet without any amount of that particular vitamin present, and see how long it would take for their teeth to fall out.
So they were using a deprivation method of analysis.
A deprivation method, and so they would see how long these people could go and how sick they would begin to get. Then they would add back the vitamin in small amounts incrementally, and then determine what the very minimum was for their teeth not to fall out, or for them not to just be lying around all day unable to move or do anything or be productive. You know, in the case of vitamin C, everything starts to go bad for you. You even get dementia. You go loony as the levels go down. That's what used to happen on the sailing ships, you know, on the long voyages, the scurvy.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Scurvy killed more sailors in the exploration days than wars did, or the drinking of rum, you might say. The RDAs come from a deprivation type of experiment, and they have nothing to do with optimal health. They have nothing to do with quality of life, because I don't think many of us want to just lie around, hardly able to move, just languorously making it through the day, you know, maybe having to sleep 12, 15 hours a day just to make it into the next day. We want to have quality of life. We want to have high energy. We want to have sharp brains. We want to be athletic. We want to be able to do all the things that a human being is capable of doing.
Certainly.
And when you look at those levels, you find differences of at least 10 and sometimes as much, up to, in the case of vitamin B12, up to about 7,000 times the RDA.
7,000 times?
7,000 times the RDA.
Wow.
Yeah. In the case of B12, sometimes a person goes to their doctor, their memory is going, they can't think straight, they can be diagnosed as Alzheimer's or other kind of dementia, but a thinking physician and a trained and informed physician will give them a shot of B12, and they can come around right away. The dementia goes away, and they click right back into shape. And that amount is about 6,667 times the RDA for vitamin B12. So, and in the case of vitamin C, you can go from about 10 times the RDA all the way up to 1,000 times the RDA. And the higher you go, the more benefit you get. And this is what Dr. Cathcart found. For vitamin C, he thought of it as 3 levels. One, the vitamin level, just the basic level to avoid having your teeth fall out. That's about the RDA, about 65 milligrams a day. Then the housekeeping level, the level at which vitamin C is used to drive many of our enzymes, some 20 different enzyme systems. And that's around about 500 to 1,000 milligrams a day. But then he found this additional effect, which is a strictly antioxidant effect, and that's the level that you go to when you have a lot of stress on your body, such as a very bad cold. And he had a patient early in his practice who we called the 200-gram cold patient, because he sent her home with some powdered C and told her to take it until she felt better. And when she came back the next week, she said she had taken the whole bottle overnight and then taken another bottle the next day, and on the third day the cold was gone. So she was taking 200 grams, 200,000 milligrams of vitamin C per day. Because when you have a cold, a bad viral infection, that burns away our vitamin C and other antioxidants like crazy. So early on during the AIDS epidemic, it was found that HIV also had this effect and created a lot of free radicals in the body, burned away antioxidants, and very quickly they were coming to Dr. Cathcart's practice and having him give them vitamin C powder to take by mouth and also vitamin C intravenously. And many of these early HIV patients, this was before even AZT, the first drug, many of them survived by going to the gym, by eating very carefully, and by taking C. And some of these patients had maybe a count of 12 T cells per milliliter, whereas it was supposed to be around 1,900 to
Wow.
1,200 or something like that. So they would have almost zero T4, CD4 cells left, but they could still survive if they would be on a rigorous program
that regimen.
with the C. Because Dr. Cathcart had realized that this particular ortho molecule could be racked up to the point where it was like a bucket brigade. The more radicals you generated, the more you could use buckets of C to put out the fire. I still travel everywhere with it myself. I was in Egypt last fall, and I had picked up something on the airplane, and I was pretty sick. I had a kind of sinusitis, my energy was real low, and the C kept me going until I got over that. So everywhere I go, I take my powdered C with me, and I find it very, very useful.
My wife's a big proponent of that too. We use it a lot as well. And I understand that it has ramifications and implications beyond just, gee, I've got a cold or whatever. Isn't there, you were telling me about some studies that have recently been done into cancer research and some of the efficacy effects of vitamin C within certain types of cancer, is that correct?
Well, you know, this is an incredible story, Dave. Bob Cathcart realized it very early on, and so did other pioneering orthomolecular physicians, that the antioxidants could be helpful for managing cancer. Not necessarily for curing cancer, but for managing it, for keeping up energy if the subject was going through chemotherapy or radiation, for giving them general better well-being, for slowing the metastasis, and sometimes even for eliminating tumors, especially smaller tumors. But nobody wanted to believe. None of the mainstream physicians wanted to believe. And there was a police group, a medical police group, I guess they still exist in California, called the Board of Medical Quality Assurance. And they had decreed that any physician in California who used vitamin C against cancer would be charged with medical fraud and could go to prison for it.
Wow.
So he was very, very careful not to get too much into that. But I have to say that subsequently, it's been found by collaboration between government scientists at the National Institutes of Health and independent scientists who are more inclined to be orthomolecular, that intravenous C, in fact, did put certain cancers into regression. They've done pilot studies, and now they're setting up to do a double-blind trial with it. And they're very excited. The mainstream people have been, there have been certain mainstream people, notably Dr. Mark Levine, a PhD at the NIH, and he started out, I believe, being pretty skeptical about this whole thing, but he did his brand of science on vitamin C, and over a period of almost 2 decades, he has got it to the point where he wanted to try it on cancer, and lo and behold, he got together with Dr. Jeannie Driscoll and other people from our side, and they found that the stuff is working for cancer.
Wow.
So Dr. Cathcart's early impressions, clinical impressions and clinical results are validated. Also, the orthomolecular theory is validated because Dr. Bruce Ames's group at Berkeley, a world-famous free radical antioxidant research group, looked at 50 different enzyme systems and did what Pauling had predicted should work, which was to look at a particular enzyme system where the enzyme was mutated and therefore not as efficient. And if they could raise the level of the substances that the enzyme needed to work, they could then get the enzyme to work almost up to normal levels.
And the vitamin C had a tremendous impact on that?
Yeah, vitamin C was one of them, but also all the B vitamins, folic acid, biotin, certain minerals such as zinc, iron, magnesium.
So again, there's a tremendous amount of information that relates to exactly what we're talking about that's up on your website that people can go up and they can learn a little bit more about this, because this is one of those topics that is fairly it's a deep topic. There's a tremendous amount of information to be had here, and there's an enormous amount of misinformation out there as well. And
that's right,
so,
Dave.
If they were to go up to your site, which I believe is www.dockidd.com,
dockidd.com,
they would have the opportunity to have access to some very specific research that's been done by some of the studies that you've mentioned here to help put some perspective into how all of these things come together.
That's right, Dave.
Okay.
I think you got it.
Okay.
Hit the nail right on the head there.
And I want to tell the folks at home too that if they have any questions about some specific questions, they can always access them to us, through us. We have our email address, info@referencepointtv.com. If there are any questions, any thoughts, any data that they would like to have more specifics about, they can email that in and I can get that to you, and we can certainly answer people's questions. Dr. Kidd, I really want to start us thinking about some of the ramifications of the things that you've talked about as it pertains to mental processes. You've already mentioned that some of the effects of vitamin B12, and I thought that was fascinating. And you had told me about some of the research that you've most recently been doing into some cognitive challenges, Alzheimer's and various and sundry other things. And I really want to get into discussing that. Now, I need to tell the folks that are viewing out there that we're actually doing 2 segments of the show tonight, because the topic that I just asked you to speak about is a very interesting and somewhat broad subject in and of itself, and I want to have us delve into that in the second segment. But could you give us just about a minute of the sort of thing that we'll be talking about next show?
Well, I can tell you, Dave, that in 1994, I came to realize that my brain was coming apart. I was under a lot of emotional stress. I was not sticking to as good a diet as I should have, and I was losing my concentration. My memory processes were going to pieces. I could not properly comprehend my scientific papers as I was reading them, and I realized I was getting into serious trouble. So I got scared for myself.
So you sound like you're about the average guy who's beyond age 30.
I was in my mid-40s at that time, and that's about the time that a lot of people begin to realize that they're not the person they used to be.
Right.
So I said to myself, well, what can I do? I'm hoping to have a long life. And so I started looking around, started studying, and I began to realize that I had the training to put some focus on this and to help myself. So I studied up on all the brain nutrients, and as a consequence of that, you know, first I started using one, then a second, then a third, and then I got into it more as part of my career. And it's fair to say that I'm pretty expert now on the use of nutrients to improve and support and enhance brain function.
Fantastic.
And the best ones are...
We're going to be talking about that in the next show. But at this point, we need to sign off. And I want you to hold that thought, because we're going to come back to this in a few minutes to tape the next show. And for the people out there, listen up, because this is going to be fascinating information. We really appreciate your being out there for Reference Point, and for myself and Dr. Kidd, I want to say thank you for viewing.